Hello, I bid you welcome to this episode of ICAN on Air program. ICAN on Air that is envisioned with a mission from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria to add significant value to body of knowledge and hence power to us, professionals, and our numerous publics. On August 16, 2020, I refer precisely to that day when President Muhammadu Buhari virtually shocked many doubters now in quotes, when in a historic move, he signed into law the Petroleum Industry Bill, now known as the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA. Perhaps in the emotive movement, many people forgot that having suffered severe setbacks for 20 years, yeah, you heard that right, 20 years, the bill navigated in and out, and it suffered the most tortuous journey in the history of lawmaking in Nigeria. Remains a major feat, notwithstanding, and it's one of the boldest flagship actions by the Buhari presidency. The PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, provides largely governance and regulatory and physical framework for the Nigerian petroleum industry, the development of the host communities, and related matters. And when it comes to these related matters, I like to say that the PIA looked at aspects of our profession, related matters, which is accounting, the auditing, the tax, and controls were major developments for professionals like you and I and friends of professionals. And joining me today in our question and answer interview segment of this program to throw more insights into a better understanding of this PIA, looking at the regulatory landscape in Nigeria, will be Oladipo Maiye FCA, who has had over 21 years, about the time that this bill started its crawl in the various assemblies in and out. He's had over 21 years experience offering tax advisory, and compliance services to a portfolio of the three of the big four global accounting firms, and is currently the partner oil, gas, and power in the Anderson LLP Nigeria, which I'll be unveiling more on our guest very shortly. And also on this program, a bit of bits on the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria and a few ads. I'd like you to please stay put, stay on, stay connected. We shall be back with you to go full blast very shortly. Thank you, Mr. Oladipo Maiye, and welcome onto ICAN on Air program for today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
And I'm just very quickly to get a general highlight overview of what this subject, which is a review of the changing regulatory landscape in the Nigerian oil and gas industry, is all about. Just to give us, in your perspective, the major provisions that taxpayers need to be aware of for compliance purposes.
Okay, thank you for that question. It's a very important question. First of all, they need to be aware that there are incentives in the PIA, lower tax rates than what we had before. So the maximum tax rate at the moment is 60%, whereas it used to be 85% for upstream companies. They also need to be aware that there are different compliance requirements and stiffer penalties for non-compliance in the PIA. But the good thing is that the incentives and the reduced tax, such as the reduced tax rate, go a long way in helping prospective investors and existing practitioners. Also, they need to be aware that new changes, for instance, all oil companies are supposed to file companies' income tax returns in addition to their hydrocarbon tax returns. Formerly, it was just the petroleum profit tax returns that upstream companies that didn't have gas were filing. So now every company is expected to file companies' income tax returns in addition to hydrocarbon tax, which replaces the petroleum profits tax.
Hmm. Hmm. Nice overview. That's new changes, new things to learn, old habits to drop, and for us to be on top of it. And when you say PIA, for those who may not know, that's the Petroleum Industry Act. Now, Mr. Maye, what are the duties and powers of the new industry regulators? I'm now talking about the commission and the authority, and how do their operations differ from the previous regulators?
So DPR has now been split into two entities. Basically, you have the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission and the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority. And so the functions of the DPR have been assigned to these two entities. And so they're supposed to work on the technical, operational, and commercial aspects of the upstream, and then the authority on the downstream and the midstream, and then look at ways of improving um, the improving participation and revenue for the Nigerian government. So
Hmm.
basically, that's the highlight in terms of the regulatory authorities.
Wow. So, I mean, excellent point. And by DPR, we're talking about the Director of Petroleum Resources. Now,
Yes.
will the existing license holders under the PPT be required to convert to the new license under the PIA?
Yes, so there are two ways. One is a voluntary compliance, voluntary conversion, and one is statutory conversion. So the marginal fields, for instance, have a statutory conversion for 18 months from the date of commencement of the act, and then the voluntary is you can choose to convert now to the Petroleum Industry Act or wait
Hmm.
until the expiration of your license or lease. So
Hmm.
that's the current expectation, yes.
Fantastic. And Mr. Olalere Babashola is asking this question. How do the incentives in PIA compare with the regimes in other competing countries? Do you see PIA attracting investment as expected and by other countries or Equatorial Guinea, Angola, and what have you? Yes, Mr. Maye.
The PIA let's look at what we had before. We had 85% tax rate, which was quite high. And now we are having reduced tax rates of 60% maximum. And we're also looking at zero hydrocarbon tax for companies in the deep offshore um, acreages. So this is very competitive um, when we compare to other countries. But then it depends on which countries you're looking at. If you look at Europe and North America, it may not be overly competitive, although it's a lot better. If you look at within maybe Africa and Asia, it's very competitive. The bigger challenge we would have as a country is whether or not the incentives are enough to bring in new investments, given that the world is moving towards an energy transition, and there's a lot of talk about an energy transition. But it's definitely competitive in my opinion.
Thank you very much for that point. And so maybe shift a bit into governance, which I think is going to be of their interest to professional accountants. Now we hear that the NNPC has been reincorporated. So NNPC Limited has been reincorporated. What does that mean for existing agreements with the company?
So it just means that the existing agreements will be transferred to NNPC Limited, and NNPC Limited would definitely will be run and we see itself as a company, which is a lot better at the moment. What we have now is should be a company, but is a pseudo government agency, and so with a commercial orientation, um, the expectation is that NNPC Limited which will eventually offer its shares to the public, will be more commercially oriented and will be faster in handling issues and um, will be better at meeting its funding obligations. So there will just be a transfer of those agreements to NNPC Limited, and nothing should change dramatically because we also have what we call savings provisions in the PIA, which should render a bit of stability to those agreements.
Thank you. Great point. And perhaps that should satisfy Sunday Oyekale, who is asking pointedly that will the PIA bring about change we need in petroleum industry? Just one word, yes.
Yes, it should bring about change. The big issue about the PIA, even beyond the terms, is that you offer certainty. For a long time, like you alluded to, um, the people didn't know what regime their investments were going to fall under. So a lot of investments that should have come into Nigeria went to other countries. Now you have certainty, and all you have to do is run your economics. Do you like this? Do you like the fiscal regime? Is it good for you? Do you have a positive MPV and so on? And so you have that certainty. So we expect additional investments in the industry, but there's going to be pressure, especially with the world looking at renewable energy and the commitments globally to energy transition. But it's definitely good for us.
Thank you very much for that. So now, Mr. Maye, how will the incorporated joint partnership between the NNPC Limited and private entities, the international oil companies operate, and how and we still have existing agreement with with NNPC to be nullified? How
Yes,
will that how will that
that's a,
happen?
that's a brilliant one because in the past, in the old PIBs, one of the contentious areas was incorporated joint ventures. And it was contentious because those versions of the PIB said that um, the NNPC and the other companies were going to incorporate a new entity in the same proportion of their interests. So let's say an unincorporated joint venture with NNPC. NNPC has 60% and I have 40%. What the old PID said was that when we incorporate a new entity, NNPC will have 60% of the shares, and then I will have 40% of the shares. And a lot of companies did not want that. Now, what the PIA is saying is that it will be voluntary, the transition to an incorporated joint venture. An IJV is simply a separate entity distinct from the owners. So it's going to be voluntary, and we can either choose to agree, choose to convert, to have our shareholding based on existing interests, or we meet and agree on what the shareholding interest should be, the proportion of shares should be that would work for us. And given this voluntary aspect of the conversion, it is hoped that this will be good. And the beauty of the IJV is actually that because it's a distinct entity, it can borrow in its own name, and it can run its own business without interference from the shareholder entities. And so it's expected to be something good in the coming years.
Thank you for those comprehensive, holistic insights, Mr. Maiye. Now, what are your views on the issue of contribution to the host community trust fund? Do you think PIA provides for greater participation by the local people concerning how the fund should be used?
Yes, this is another contentious issue. At the moment, the PIA says 3% of operating profits on a preceding year basis, and some people wanted more. But the beauty of the PIA is that it says that every settlor, that is the companies in the oil industry, will set up a board of trustees, and that board of trustees will be made up of indigenes of the host communities. And these indigenes can then, because they are participating in the running of the fund, they can choose what projects are important. So I would expect there will be a lot of dialogue, and we have the money, we know what is going to be. So what are the projects that are important? So it's now not, you can't argue anymore that the disbursement of the funds or the allocation of the funds was at the discretion of the oil companies, or the oil companies did not follow the memorandum of understanding with the communities, the MOUs, because the board of trustees are indigenes of those communities, and they are the ones who have a say. And this calls for inclusiveness and hopefully development of the host communities.
Very interesting point. And Mr. Maiye, fellow accountants and other professionals will understand why perhaps the issue of host community, all the agitations, that insight that you have provided will be very, very useful. And then step back to this host community agreement. Do you think this existing agreement between the host community and companies being nullified given the enactment of the PIA?
I don't necessarily believe they will be nullified, because if there are good aspects of the existing agreements, the Board of Trustees will carry forward those good aspects into the new arrangement, which is a Board of Trustees with a settlor. And then there would now be available funds based on the 3% of operating expenses to fulfill those obligations. But it also gives the host communities an opportunity to update those existing agreements to what is common, what is now relevant to those host communities. So the settlers or the oil companies don't have an excuse that this was what you said years ago. You have a chance to update those requests.
Excellent point for management of change. Yeah. I mean, that is how it is done elsewhere. Now, I'm going a bit technical to areas that I know will interest us accountants. Um, how does tax computation and remittance differ under the PIA and PPT? And what are the underlying requirements for the computation of these taxes?
Oh, that's a good one. So the first thing to know is that the PPT, the petroleum profits tax, used to have three conditions for deductibility: deduction of expenses, wholly, exclusively, and necessarily. Now, the PIA introduces a reasonability test, and reasonableness, is a very contentious issue because
Mm,
it is subjective. What is reasonable to you may not be reasonable to me. I mean, we can go and buy the same car, and the prices we pay will be very different. So it's subjective. So that is one aspect of the PIE people should watch out for. Also, the deductions. The items that are deductible under the PIE are different. Big issues will be bad debts is no longer deductible, um, arbitration costs are not deductible, um, interest on borrowing is no longer deductible, and so on. These are not deductible under the hydrocarbon tax. Let me put it that way, but they are deductible under CIT. So the
mm,
basis for hydrocarbon tax, which is the resource tax, and is slightly different from what PPT is. But now you are expected to also file your company's income tax, and then some these items would definitely be deductible under the CIT. But another big item that would no longer be deductible under the hydrocarbon tax would be head office costs. There's a cost ceiling which we have now under the hydrocarbon tax of it's called the cost price ratio, which means that 65% you can only get a deduction of up to 65% of the costs that you've incurred that are allowable under the hydrocarbon tax. It means that the excess cost will be transferred to subsequent years, added to those costs, and then you are hit with the cost price ratio again.
mm,
So it's good to what I would expect from fellow accountants is before we file, it would be nice to do draft computations and discuss widely because I find that there people have slightly different interpretations of certain provisions. So even if you are a guru, it would be nice to confer widely and
mm.
run scenarios, simulations before filing tax returns under the PIA.
And Mr. Maye, you never go wrong if you consult and consult and consult widely. And for our fellows and participants in the oil and gas industry, I'm talking about the accountants, the tax practitioners, the auditors, the forensic auditors. I know there have been issues surrounding the requirements and the provisions of the PIA that relates to companies operating in different value chain of that industry. What in brief would be this requirement and provision?
Okay, so the big requirement is that companies are supposed to separate their activities. So one company cannot do upstream and midstream. So it's supposed to be placed in separate entities. So that's really the big requirement. And then if you have these different entities, the upstream in addition would be filing companies income tax in addition to the hydrocarbon tax. But there's a big requirement that you have to um, have the separate entities
Hmm,
for the different aspects of the value chain in the oil and gas industry.
beautiful. Mr. Maye, I won't allow you to go yet. I need you to do some other clarifications. I know the PIA perhaps has done incentives and exemptions for upstream, of course, the downstream, the midstream companies that will encourage foreign direct investment in the country. Are there insights you can give to us in this direction?
Yes, definitely. So the downstream and midstream entities will be entitled to the gas utilization incentives. And the big incentive there is tax holidays. And the tax holidays can extend from 5 years to 10 years. So this should definitely bring in foreign direct investments. And for the upstream segment, like we've said, the tax rates are lower, particularly for deep offshore. Deep offshore, as we know, is very expensive, and um, it's it's very capital intensive. Let's put it that way. So you need incentives in case your expectations are not met, and there's zero hydrocarbon tax for these upstream entities. But for downstream and midstream, we have these generous incentives in the gas utilization which the biggest one is tax holidays.
Mhm. Fantastic. Fantastic point. So, and if I hear you correctly, put the governance well, do the management of change well, and we are transparent, and we count and show integrity, which is the hallmark of what ICAN teaches us by way of this motto. We should, in the nick of time, be attracting clean money, clean investment into that sector. And I now then take you, Mr. Mai, perhaps into the upstream and downstream, and to ask you what the conditions for companies on conversion from PPT to PIA. What is the statutory period of conversion? Is there a statutory period of conversion that we should know?
Okay, so for marginal fields, it will be 18 months from the date of commencement of the act, or if it's voluntary, you can convert now. For other entities, it will be um, voluntary or at the expiration of the license or lease. But the condition for early conversion is that all arbitration cases with NNPC and the stability clauses would no longer be applicable. So, and that's the big this thing. So you are going to forfeit whatever arbitration cases you have to be able to enjoy the benefits of early conversion.
Hmm. Thank you very much, Mr. Maye. And of course, the ultimate question that I know he sets big corporations, whether oil and gas, elsewhere, and is the issue surrounding health, safety, and the environment. So the provision of the PIA specifically cover this segment of operations.
Oh, definitely. Now, it's specific that gas flare penalties or fees are not deductible, and the PIA is going to make regulations. It empowers the authority to make regulations to deter people from gas flaring. And then there are a lot of provisions on the commissioning and abandonment. Now, the commissioning and abandonment is putting back the environment to the way it was. So there's a requirement to set aside funds, which will be monitored and you have to put it in a bank account um, that is not an affiliate of the oil company. You put it in a bank account from when the going is good, when you are producing, and so that those funds are ready when your production stops, and you take out of those funds and you bring back or try as much as possible to bring back the environment to the state it was. Now, as an incentive, you have tax deduction for any funded contributions to decommissioning and abandonment. And so we have the commissioning and abandonment provisions, and we have the gas flare provisions, and then we have general health and safety provisions in the PIA.
Thank you very much for those nice, interesting points. And I will quickly just speak to our audience, just in case you are just tuning on. I have been on this ICAN on Air Enlightening program, which, by the way, comes free to us as professionals and friends of the profession. And we've been looking at the changing regulatory landscape of the Nigerian oil and gas industry, occasioned by the PIA. And on our guest to answer and give insight has been Oladipo Maiye FCA, a consultant and a partner oil, gas, and power in Anderson LLP Nigeria. You could please throw in your questions. No question is foolish. No question cannot be attempted and answered, so that we can drive this knowledge much deeper. Now, Mr. Mai, thank you very much for the governance, the tax aspects, and the law says ignorance is not an excuse. And one of the things that you really mentioned that I think caught me is that there has to be a lot of consulting for gray areas, just to be sure, and so I don't find yourself in the wrong trouser, as they say. Now, does the provision of the PIA border around energy transition and the future of energy? I know earlier you talked about the fact that it's transitioning into things like electric cars, frank technology that the US during Obama pushed, and quite a number of countries, including just sincerely Nigeria, had to shape. So, do you think they will have enough provisions in the BIA to put around energy transition and for the future of energy?
Good thing but the PIA is a bit silent on the energy transition, but one of the principal functions of NNPC Limited is to look at renewable energy. And given that NNPC Limited is commercially oriented, it would have to look at ways of competing in the renewable energy space. The beauty about renewable energy is that it's good for the environment, but it's also profitable. And so with NNPC Limited being commercial and looking at renewable energy as an investment, we expect that they'll be able to drive more government participation in the renewable energy space, and which will be good for us as a country environmentally. But in terms of specifics in transitioning out of fossil fuels, the PIA is a bit silent on that, but the PIA can't contain every provision because the PIA has given powers to the Commission and the authority to make regulations from time to time that will be good for the country.
Fantastic. So should that not drag me into dragging you back a little bit? Because when we are talking about future of energy, I know in times past, maybe 25, 30 years back, there were issues surrounding the oil and gas, talking about the local content, the Nigerian content, transfer of technology. And as we always say, those technologies will not be given, but will be snatched. With the PIA in place, do you see Nigerians? I've seen a couple of Nigerians, I have to confess. I hope some of our colleagues who are outside our jurisdiction in Nigeria are listening professionals. They have to go out there and they have been adjudged as one of the best and the smartest ever in terms of making sure they get this technology and even go further. Do you see PIA here for energizing the potential, the human capacity development of the average Nigerian going forward?
Very tough question. I think ultimately, if you're going to make money, you would have to develop your workforce, and there's a lot of money to make under the PIA. For instance, one of the things the authority is looking at, that is the downstream and midstream, is going to be that instead of using firewood, there should be more LPG. Um, that's the gas in the cylinder, and the gas should be piped. You know, it's in Nigeria at the moment. You buy a cylinder and you fill it up, but there should be gas piped to homes, and there should be it should be so cheap to use um, and efficient to use LPGs. So you don't have to, or cooking gas, so you don't have to cut down the trees and affect the environment. So what we
Okay.
expect is that along the value chain, there will be a lot of people, from the bottlers, the people producing the bottles, to the pipelines. And pipelines can get up to 10 years tax holiday. So you may not even have the gas. You are just connecting the producer to the end user, and you are making good money along the value chain. So the expectation is that there will be a lot of participation, and if you're going to participate and you want to make money, then you have to develop your workforce. You have to train them. You have to make a commitment to them, and the Nigerian workforce are the ones who are chances are want to remain here in the long term. So I mean, you can't just keep bringing foreigners. You definitely have to train the Nigerian workforce, and might even end up making companies commit to universities or institutions of higher learning, because you want the best people from these places.
Super. I actually asked that question pointedly because I've seen Nigerians in the past 15, 20 years. There's the cream de la cream in the industry. They've had to go help set up in Angola. They've had to go and help set up in Uncle Bob's country. You know what I call Uncle Bob? Robert Mugabe. And then, of course, Ghana and Equatorial Guinea. Mr. Larry Babashola is coming up again here. Nice question that we have here. That in addition to the fiscal provisions of PIA, of course, there are various taxes applicable to oil and gas, and more are still being enacted. How does this affect investment in the industry?
Yes, it's a good question from Babashola, Mr. Babashola. The when you are, oil and gas is very capital intensive, and the major tax would always be your hydrocarbon tax and your company's income tax. All these other bits and pieces should not necessarily affect your economics. So now that you have the certainty with the hydrocarbon tax, the and the company's income tax, you know what the rates are, you know what the provisions on deductibility are. So those small taxes, like NASENI, which is the Nigerian Science and Engineering Infrastructure Fund, rates of 0.5% or 1%, all of those should not really affect your investments. The bigger issues is even whether there's a perception that with the regulatory authorities will be friendlier, and not you won't they're not adversarial, but those are the environment. You don't want people taking your oil and stealing your oil. Those are the bigger worries than these small taxes and levies that are coming up.
Hmm. Interesting. And okay, in specific reference to gas, Mr. Babashola is still asking that do we have adequate incentive for gas investment in the PIA?
Yes, we have. So the PIA is saying that you are going to have entitlement to the gas utilization incentives. which I've said provides tax holidays. Um, and then the authority is also mandated to come up with to meet with the industry and and represent government in coming up with acceptable prices for gas and
Mm.
the tariffs for the pipeline. So
Super.
the authority is going to be looking at it. You want gas in Nigeria, but it shouldn't be at the detriment of the gas producer. So the expectation and one of the mandates of the authority is to come up with a framework that helps Nigeria to get affordable gas, but also keeps gas players in business, and also come up with a tariff structure for pipelines and so on that will enable companies to be profitable, either side of the
Fantastic.
valuation. Yeah.
Fantastic. Mr. Maiye, has there been commissioning and decommissioning going on in the Nigerian oil and gas industry? Any that you know?
Um, Not a lot. What I know is that a number of prolific fields, um, prolific meaning they were producing a lot. They are going to hit abandonment very
Mm.
soon, and so those companies are reserving funds for the
I see.
decommissioning and restoration of those places. So we're
Excellent.
going to have a lot. So when the
Excellent.
price of crude oil went up, it provided an additional incentive to produce a lot. So that
Mm.
the more you take out, the faster you hit abandonment. So
That's right.
we are expecting a lot of abandonment in the coming years.
Hmm. Thank you very much for that insight. And what will be the provisions of the PI on payment of royalties? How do they differ from royalty provisions that we had under the PPT?
Okay, so the big difference is under the Petroleum Act, there was just one basis of paying royalty. You had the royalty rate, and your rate depended on where you operated, the kind of acreage you have, onshore, shallow water, deep offshore. But now what we have is royalty that is payable by production, which is your volume, and then price. And this is because the government wants to get the benefit of high crude oil prices. So we now have royalty payable by volume and then royalty payable by price. You don't trigger a royalty payable by price if the price of crude oil is low, or you trigger it, government gets something additional when the price of crude oil is high. And generally, the royalty rates are fairly reduced under the PIA, or they are
Mm.
reduced under the PIA. Let me be fair. So they are reduced, and hopefully this should attract additional investments. We hope. Yeah.
Fantastic insight. Great input, and I believe our listeners who have really benefited from some of these insights. And this can happen, courtesy ICAN on Air, that initiative of experience sharing, which is a way of giving back of value to a mission, a vision, and research by the great Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria. Mr. Maye, we talk about collaboration. This is the name of the game. You don't know, you find out from those who know. You don't have the capacity, you go out there and get them. And I know certainly that the PIA will may have requirements as regards mergers and acquisition of upstream and downstream companies. Will I be right? Will I
You are
be wrong?
definitely right. You are definitely right. So the requirement is, like I said, the separation of those activities. If you're in upstream and downstream, they have to be in separate entities. But if there's an integrated project, you and you want it, you want a merger, you want a special dispensation for a merger because you think operationally it would be better to merge those entities, then you will seek permission before you merge the before you merge those the different aspects of the value chain. And also, typically, every merger and acquisition has to be approved by the minister. You would need ministerial consent for mergers and acquisition. Yeah.
Super. Super. Thank you very much, Mr. Maiye, giving us this in-depth, and we have really looked and reviewed the changing regulatory landscape in Nigerian oil and gas, especially as affects us accountants, friends of accountants, those who love business. I can't thank you any better. Before I thank you more profusely, may I have your last word on this subject?
First of all, I will want to thank the Institute of Chartered Accountants for this. It's a brilliant opportunity. To be honest, we learn every day. You learn from the questions you are asked. You learn from interactions. I think the PIA is going to be a game changer. Not everybody likes the provisions of the PIA, but people definitely like that it provides certainty. Like you alluded to when you spoke, the PIA was a long time coming, and you can't invest when you don't know what the rate is. So whether the rate is good or bad, you know what you're expecting. And so we have it's going to be a game changer because you can make your decisions now. There's a focus on renewable energy through NNPC Limited. There's a commercial orientation, and there's an expectation that it won't be business as usual. Go out there and make money for the Nigerian people. And also, the Nigerian people can participate eventually when NNPC Limited offers the shares. So the future looks bright. Let's hope the implementation goes well, and let's hope everything works well. And we accountants, I'm a proud member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. There will definitely be opportunities for us. All we have to do is be ready, update our skills, update our knowledge, and I'm even looking forward to accountants owning the companies that would invest in these projects because we are prudent and we carry out deep analysis before spending money. So definitely, I think the sky is the limit for us. Yeah. So thank you for that.
I should thank you for the insights you have given, and we are going to be calling on you much later for deeper insights. I'd like to also thank our online guests. Please, I'd like you to hang on. We are not over yet. We'll go on a short break, and I'm going to be back with you very shortly. ICAN on Air. That is the program. you, online participants, my professional colleagues, friends, for keeping faith with us. And this is what we do 2 times in a week. Please don't keep that to yourself. And in addition, is the fact that you could come on and advertise your goods and services. And ICAN will take it to the farthest ends of the earth. I mean, it will get value from you from different parts of the globe. A number of people are already calling on us. Don't be left out, and make sure you get that on. And may I, at this point, take your permission to make an announcement on behalf of the 57th President of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, Mrs. Comfort Tayo, CFP, CFA, MNI, FCA, to our professional colleagues in the armed forces and friends of Nigeria in the armed forces on the just past Armed Forces Remembrance Day. She sends her love to the families of our slain heroes left behind. We are not going to. The Institute will not leave our professional colleagues, will not leave them hanging. Calling on Nigeria to also help ICAN, but we go for the best all the time and always with integrity and the fear of God. Our next episode on ICAN on Air will be on Thursday, January the 20th, 2022. And the time, of course, will be 6 p.m. West African time. Venue will be the ICAN portals. Like that you have just joined, go in there, like ICAN, do that, and give somebody else a gift of this knowledge. Tell somebody to also tell somebody that this is on for ICAN, and ICAN is doing this as part of our giving back to knowledge. ICAN believes that professional knowledge shared and given is only going to help us in uplifting our GDP, if you understand what I mean. And so the topic we are going to be looking at on January 20, 2022 will be the role of accountants in a digital economy. The role of accountants in a digital economy. And we are going to be having our guest in Ademola Adebise FCA, a famed professional in information technology, financial controls and strategic planning, in treasury, corporate banking, risk management, and performance management. And by his current definition, career-wise, he is the managing director of Wema Bank PLC. Please make sure you don't miss this. And like I told you, please tell your friends and associates. Let me leave you with this thought, and I quote. We want to see oil and gas regulations on a continental basis, given the integrated nature of the industry. With the current conditions in oil and gas sector. That quote is attributable to Stephen Harper. It will be the change you like to see. And until we come your way, January 20, 2022, by the special grace of the Almighty God, I remain Akifatunke, your anchor, ICAN on air. Now you stay safe and bye for now.